Natanz, and Isfahan. How? It looks like President Trump, Vice President Vance, and others. It looks like Secretary Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio here. Let's listen to the president after the strikes on Iran.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, there you have it. President Trump, in very brief remarks there, saying that Iran's nuclear program has been completely obliterated. Standing there, addressing the nation, behind him, Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and also the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us here on this momentous night in American history, and we're going to keep it going. We're also going to be showing you in replay that very speech in case you might have missed it live. We're going to be showing it to you throughout the course of the evening, also bringing on guests, experts, analysts to help us make sense of this particular moment in time in American history, in the history, the makeup, and the shape, the dynamic of the Middle East. June the 21st, 2025 will be a day that is remembered as a huge, huge moment for what happens going forward to the dynamic of the Middle East, and we'll just have to wait and see. A lot of you are probably asking yourself, now what? I think that's a safe question, an apt question to be asking. And the sun coming up now over the skies of Jerusalem. We also know that President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were on the phone. The United States gave the Israelis a heads up that they were going to do this, and you can see there. In the meantime, speaking of the Israeli leader, we also got on social media a message from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well, thanking the Trump administration. What we want to do right now, we want to show that video to you as well. Let's listen to this.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
Okay, so there you have it. That was the message from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanking the Trump administration in conjunction with an update on Operation Rising Lion that we have been following ever since last Thursday when I was on the air with you when Israel launched those preemptive strikes on sites in Iran here. So what we want to do right now, because there's a lot of moving pieces to this story, it is fluid, it is breaking, it is developing. If you missed it live, we want to play it yet again. This was very brief from President Trump here. Let's re-rack it. Let's show it to you in case you might have missed it.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so Andrew Kraft back here. Wanted to replay that for you in case you might have missed it, saying that he and Netanyahu worked as a team, congratulating the Patriots who flew the bombers and the planes, congratulated the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Raisin Kane, and says this could not continue, saying we needed peace, saying also there are many targets left, say he will go after other targets if deals are not reached. And so, yet again, as he has done throughout the course of this entire story, leaving the door open, yet again, to diplomacy. We'll see if that's actionable or operative at all in the wake of this. In the meantime, though, I want to go out to Capitol Hill. We have a live picture there in Washington. It's a little bit after the 10 o'clock hour there in D.C. Chad Pergram reporting this, that it wasn't only the Israelis that got a heads up. A senior White House official saying the White House gave a courtesy heads up to congressional leadership. That's, of course, Senate Majority Leader John Thune. That's, of course, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. And I would imagine the Democrats also in charge in the minority, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and also House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Speaking of Hakeem Jeffries, he put out a statement saying this, that Donald Trump promised to bring peace to the Middle East. He's failed to deliver on that promise. The risk of war is now dramatically increased, and I pray for the safety of our troops in the region who have been put in harm's way. President Trump misled the country about his intentions, failed to seek congressional authorization for the use of military force, and risks American entanglement in a potentially disastrous war in the Middle East. Jeffries says, first, the Trump administration bears the heavy burden of explaining to the American people why this military action was undertaken. Second, Congress must be fully and immediately briefed in a classified setting. Third, Donald Trump shoulders complete and total responsibility for any adverse consequences that flow from his unilateral military action here. In the meantime, back out live there to the U.S. Capitol. Also, some other news made in that very, very short statement by the president that at 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning, there will be a press briefing at the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth will be there, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, will be there as well, taking questions from reporters. So, of course, here on Live Now from Fox, we will be showing you that press conference live in its entirety, 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, Sunday morning, 5 a.m. Pacific time. In the meantime, we still have my colleague and friend, of course, national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer, still on the horn after so many hours. Hal, you and I have been on the air for so many of these historic moments. I would say that this is one of the most major ones, and it's always a pleasure. And I know you're traveling, and so we thank you for your time. So I got to ask, and you heard me say this question, what now? You heard Hakeem Jeffries in that statement saying that the president needs to reaffirm, explain to the American people why this was needed. Did he do that in that brief statement?
Andrew, I kind of listened to it, and I think he kind of did. I don't think there's any more explanation that needs to be put out there. I think he kind of explained the imperative of why the strikes took place now. He also outlined some things that I was kind of curious about, which was how much communication was there, coordination, if you will. They informed leaders of Congress, which I thought was really good. That was something that the president should do. But I was glad to see that did happen. It also kind of cleared up any doubts about how well this was coordinated with Israel. It had to be coordinated to a high degree simply because they had to deconflict airspace and a lot of other things. So it wasn't like Israel was going to be caught off guard that we were sending B-2 bombers into Iranian airspace or that we were launching Tomahawk missiles. So that all had to be coordinated regardless in terms of what was happening there. But I think probably one of the biggest things there, and by the way, he did kind of illuminate the battle damage, if you will, in terms of how much destructive force was used. He basically clarified as if there was any doubt that the Fordo facility was gone, and that the other two sites were also essentially neutralized. But the other thing was, what is the intent going forward? And on the one hand, he's handed out the olive branch, if you will, saying, look, diplomacy. At the same time, he's raised a sword of Damocles and saying, and I think he's made that very clear. And he's also said, not only is a sword of Damocles here, we have a list of targets that we're looking at. In other words, planning, preparation, the forces are in place, everything to follow up on that, which I have to tell you, when you're negotiating on the national security side of the house, it is good to have a very credible threat in hand to say, let's try and work this out, or here's the alternative.
Okay.
And I think we removed all doubt that the U.S. will launch or do something because, well, frankly, we just did it.
Yeah.
So
Hal, I have to say there's kind of two thoughts in my head right now at the same time, maybe President Trump's too, is, he left open the door for diplomacy. He used the word deal again, but said if that is not operative, that there also is the door open for more strikes and more targets from the United States. And so I think a lot of people are asking, our viewers are maybe asking themselves, what next? Will there be more? Is that safe to ask that question? The uncertainty of that right now, it's kind of a wait and see, is it not?
I think it is a wait and see. On the other hand, that's a very legitimate question to ask.
Okay.
And what he has done is he has removed the doubt that the U.S. is prepared to do more than what we just did. The question is, was this a proverbial one and done? Was this going to be our sole thing that we were going to do in that conflict and then walk away? And he's left it open that, no, we're ready to do more. Of course, the other part of this is, what will be the Iranian response? Will they start targeting U.S. bases in and around the Arab or Persian Gulf? Will they, start doing some other things around the world using their proxy network or their clandestine network or something like that? What will be the Iranian response to this? And of course, that will help drive what our follow-on actions would be to counter that response and to deal with the nation state of Iran.
Yeah.
So he's kind of left this wide open, but it's rather interesting. I really think, look, how did we get here? He opened up that 60-day window. He said, look, I'm going to have 60 days to negotiate something with Iran. And Iran basically did what Iran always does in these negotiations, which is they kind of played around. They wouldn't make concessions, and they'd come back with this over-the-top rhetoric and stuff like, we're not going to do anything, and blah, to the point is, I think at one point they were almost asking for Israel to surrender. It's a language almost that strong. It wasn't quite that way, but I was like, really? That's how you're going to negotiate this thing? And I was listening to this, and I was like, we're really not making a lot of progress here. And literally at the end of the 60 days is when Israel started these strikes. And I think that clearly sent a message that this diplomatic overture is something you might want to pay a lot of attention to, because it's not just rhetoric.
Okay.
If you fail to do it, there will be consequences. And I think that at this point, with President Trump saying what he just said, The consequences side of that is absolutely unambiguously clear to Iran. What will happen going forward?
I see. You know how all week I've been asking you the question and posing it this way, that Israel couldn't strike these sites, these nuclear sites, without our help. And so maybe our viewers are wondering, what did Israel do to assist? Or was this completely unilateral on the United States' part here? Because I was under the impression that if we were going to do this, which we did, that Israel would be involved in some capacity, maybe with intelligence sharing, maybe with actual kinetic assistance here. So I think that's a really interesting question. And I have to get this on with you as well. The misdirection, the diversion, to me, has been so impressive to the point, remember, there was a lot of talk today about this kind of fleet of B-2 bombers, it was reported, flying towards Guam, west. And then you have to think, well, why would they be flying west? Jennifer Griffin reporting this. The mission followed reports, of course, of 6 B-2s taking off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri around midnight last night. While initial chatter suggested the aircraft were headed west toward Guam, Jennifer Griffin noted the true flight path was likely east, directly toward Iran, in what appears to have been a calculated deception. How much did that throw Iran off guard?
Well, I will say this. The art of war is deception, and misdirection. And this was very well done. It was, they said they're going west. I actually, I was sitting there doing the math. I'm like, you don't really gain much by forward deploying our bombers to Guam. And by the way, I should mention, I've been to Guam a lot. I've been on Anderson Air Force Base. I've seen the hangars where the B-2s are stored. I mean, I'm very familiar with that, but the math just doesn't support it. The only thing you really gain out of it is that if you're going to do a really long range mission out of Guam, you don't get anything in terms of range. But if you're doing a long range mission, you may not have to overfly some places that you otherwise would have to overfly, which is kind of important when you're doing long range bomber missions. But there wasn't a whole lot that was gained from doing that. Now, what we're certainly seeing is they said, hey, we're going to Guam. Now, Guam is known to host B-2s. They have a facility to do so. They have a big hangar and stuff. So that would make sense, to say, okay, they're going to Guam, because that is the one place we acknowledge where we could actually put B-2s other than White Air Force Base. So it's, it's like, okay, but it was complete misdirection. They had launched. They can't really cover up the fact they've launched. I mean, literally, you could sit outside the base and watch them launch. So you can't really cover that part up, operationally speaking. But where they're going, once they get in the air, once they get at altitude, they're stealth bombers. You can't see them at night. They can change course and go another direction, which obviously they did. And so this was all part of, operational tactical deception. The other thing, too, which you and I have talked about quite a bit, was the language that was being used. Within 2 weeks. That's what the president said. Within 2 weeks. That's what the White House was saying, within 2 weeks, which the Iranians heard, oh, great, we got 2 weeks. And some were saying, and nobody was wanting to disabuse them of that, because nobody was going to say exactly when they're going to do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to believe 2 weeks, you can. So the Iranians, I think, were pretty much caught off guard. They didn't expect this to happen when it happened, which is, if you do a big military strike, that's what you want. So, it was very, I got to tell you, I'm with you. This was very well executed, very well done. They achieved what they were trying to achieve, which is they caught the Iranians off guard. And of course, the airspace has to be completely coordinated with the Israelis. So, you knew that was going to have to be a very integrated sort of approach regardless. By the way, I would mention the Israelis also hit the F-14s. All right. So now, look, Iran doesn't have much in the way of fighter aircraft, and those F-14s are really old. They can't do much. But these are B-2 bombers. Their whole thing is stealth. And if an F-14 was to get in the air, was to find some way to get into proximity of a B-2 bomber, there is a potential threat that they could pose. Well, the Israelis took that off. They eliminated that. So there was a coordinated piece with the Israelis on this. It wasn't just us. The Israelis did something in coordination with this.
Okay. Hal Kemper, we're going to leave it at that. We always appreciate your insight, especially on this historic occasion. Hal, thanks so much. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, back out live there to the White House. I want to put up this map so you can get a sense of the bunker bomb strategy there. So you just heard the president saying that Iran's key nuclear sites were, quote unquote, completely and fully obliterated by U.S. strikes. Trump made the comments you just heard at the White House tonight, hours after announcing the U.S. military had carried out strikes against 3 key nuclear facilities in Iran. The president also warned Tehran against carrying out retaliatory attacks against the U.S., saying Iran has the choice between peace or tragedy. So this is a breaking news update, as you know. Also, Iran's nuclear agency on Sunday, it's Sunday in Iran, confirming attacks took place on its Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz atomic sites, but is insisting that its work will not be stopped. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran issued that statement after President Trump announced the American attack on the facilities here. So there is confirmation from Iran that there was actual targets that were struck by the United States. Their state-run news agency, IRNA, reported early Sunday the attacks targeted the country's Isfahan and Natanz nuclear sites. The IRNA quoted an individual by the name of Akbar Salehi, that's Isfahan's deputy governor in charge of security affairs, saying there had been attacks around the sites, though he did not elaborate. Another official confirmed an attack targeting Iran's underground Fordo nuclear site here. So in the meantime, we do want to bring in more voices to the conversation, including my friend there at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, David Dawood. He's going to join us in just a moment here. All right, like I said here, David Dawood joining me. We are in full breaking news coverage here. We want to thank everyone for watching on this very late Saturday night. David, thanks for joining us on this late Saturday night, but it's a historic occasion, a historic, momentous occasion here. I'm going to ask a simplistic question that may sound somewhat glib and simplistic to viewers. Has the United States ever struck targets inside Iran? Have we ever used military force inside the country of Iran?
No, not to this extent. There was Operation Eagle Claw, which was meant to rescue American hostages that were held by affiliates of the government of Iran after the revolution. That unfortunately failed. The hostages were not rescued. They were released upon the President Reagan taking office. But this is unprecedented for the United States to have struck Iran at all internally and definitely in this manner.
So, David, I have to ask this, and maybe this is unanswerable right now. I mean, President Trump did say Iran's nuclear program is completely obliterated after tonight here. How will we know that? Will we have, people on the ground who can confirm that? Yes, the president is saying that here, but as far as Iran's nuclear program, where does it stand right now? What phase is it in? Is it completely decimated, like the president says, or is it too early to know?
Well, right now I'd say it's too early to know. The Iranians themselves are saying that the fissile material was moved out of the facilities prior to the strikes, or much earlier than the strikes they were claiming. Now, look, is that true? Is that a face-saving claim so they can walk down the de-escalatory ladder? Right now, these strikes put them in a position where they may have to respond in some fashion. They've been threatening to attack U.S. assets and U.S. personnel for some time if any strike by the United States occurred in Iran. Now it's time for them to put their figurative money where their mouth is, and they may not want to do that because there will be consequences. As President Trump said, you attack us, we're going to keep attacking back. So it may be that this is their way, claiming that the fissile material was moved to be able to walk this back and not follow through on these threats. It may be true. I think time will tell more so than anything. We have the intelligence that the Israelis were able to gather on location of these sites, nuclear scientists. I mean, obviously that's going to be put into play to figure out what the state of Iran's nuclear weapons program, its nuclear program period, but particularly its nuclear weapons program is after these strikes. But that may take some time to make that full assessment.
I mean, we have a live picture there over Jerusalem as the sun comes up right now. And obviously, I don't have to say this, I'm going to reiterate it, but we know when Israel launched the preemptive strikes last Thursday, Iran retaliated in kind, and it's been this tit for tat ever since. Now, the dynamic of whatever Iran does in retaliation will look different. We have U.S. assets in the region in the form of materiel, in the form of troops, also American citizens in the region, many of whom, are being evacuated from Israel right now. If you're watching this right now from the United States, is it right to be concerned how Iran will retaliate? We don't know. Can they even? And what does that look like?
Again, there are a lot of question marks here. So the Israelis have been engaged in now I think it's a 10-day campaign in Iran to degrade not just the nuclear weapons program, but they've also been striking the ballistic missiles program and other military assets. I think there was a strike on the Iranian Navy yesterday as well. So there's this degradation of Iran's ability to retaliate directly. Now, if we look at the ballistic missiles, in terms of their attacks on Israel, they've been decreasing in the quantity of barrages overall and the quantity of missiles within each barrage. I think last night or yesterday, there was one missile barrage of 5 missiles each. It's the lowest that's happened since the onset of the war. Now, simultaneously, the Israelis were saying that they've destroyed most of Iran's ballistic missile launchers. But this doesn't mean that Iran's out of assets. Now, could it suggest that Iran's running out of ballistic missiles? That's one explanation. The other explanation is that the Iranians are holding back assets in anticipation of precisely what happened now, that the United States would get involved in this conflict and they'd have to respond to the United States, which could, anytime you have any military engagement, there's the possibility that this could precipitate a much larger, much more protracted conflict between Iran and the United States. So is Iran holding assets in reserve? They're also, and this is something that, they've been kind of missing from the scene, but Iran's proxies, Hezbollah is the primary proxy. It's taken a beating, but anyone who says that Hezbollah is down for the count is speaking prematurely. So has Iran been holding this in reserve until such a moment? There's also the Houthis, the Iraqi militias. The Iranians are also masters at clandestine operations abroad and in the region if they want to target U.S. personnel. So they have options that are beyond military strikes or direct military strikes through their ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. There are other assets that they could use and activate to threaten the United States, maybe not directly our homeland. They might not want to go that far at this moment, but definitely our assets in the region or in Europe.
That is the question, especially from some critics of this action, including from some members of the president's own party, that this will turn into yet another foreign entanglement, that this will be protracted. But then I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Trump's first term, where he struck targets in Syria. That was a one-off. Do you see similarities to that here tonight?
Well, I think there's an even more appropriate analogy, the strike on Qasem Soleimani in January of 2020, where Trump took the move, and then he went up and said, similar to what he said today, both on Truth Social and in his statement, that we're done. Now's the time for peace. And Iran could, there are reports that the United States had informed Iran that there's no intention on the part of the United States to engage in regime change in Iran, that these strikes will be a one-off, that they will target these facilities, and that'll be it for us. Now, Iran obviously has to engage in some face-saving measure. This is more, as much for them to restore deterrence to the extent that they can restore deterrence after this, as it is to show that their base, and this is the real threat to the regime, that they are still capable of responding in kind, of retaliating in kind, that they're not just going to take this quietly. But it could just end up at that, where they engage in a face-saving measure that's able to shore up their image domestically, and President Trump doesn't have to continue down this escalatory ladder with the Iranians. That is a possibility.
So, David, a lot has been said about Israel's role in all of this, that they are really doing the dirty work on behalf of Western civilization, if you want to characterize it as follows. Do you envision a scenario where, talking about Iran's retaliation to this tonight, that they would also, bear the brunt of whatever Iran does, Israel, that they will suffer the slings and arrows of what we have done in still the skies of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and the like here? Do you think that could happen?
It's very much a possibility. The Home Front Command, just prior to President Trump speaking, had issued updated instructions to, they loosened requirements in the past couple of days because Iran's ballistic missiles attacks had become less frequent. Like I said, fewer missiles per barrage. The Israelis were able to contend with them better, and now they've raised those alerts again. So I think the Israelis are expecting some kind of retaliation. And look, let's be honest here. The Israelis fired the first blows in this. They paved the way today. There were reports today that the reason the B-2 bombers were able to make it into Iran safely and out was because the Israelis were destroying Iranian assets along the way that could have impeded the movement of these B-2 bombers. So the Iranians are aware that the Israelis are involved and that they contributed to this strike. So there very well could be a retaliation against Israel.
Okay, so some more kind of philosophical questions right now. I'm not even sure if it's time for that because this is still a breaking news story. But you and I talk about the 30,000-foot view from this. Is it naive to say that after tonight, Iran will no longer have a nuclear program? Because I was asking guests like yourself all week, will it take only regime change for Iran to give up their nuclear program here or not? I mean, clearly, President Trump says their program's no more. After tonight, the Ayatollah is still alive, still in charge. So is the regime change question right now not the question we should be asking or premature? Because you have to separate the two. Who's in charge of Iran and their nuclear program?
Look, I think it may be too soon to tell. What the Iranians are saying is that you can destroy these facilities, you can destroy the centrifuges, but you can't destroy the know-how. What the Israelis are proving is that they can destroy the know-how. They've been engaged in an assassination campaign against Iran's top nuclear scientists. So if this regime survives and if this regime is able to rebuild and have a pathway to rebuilding, which as things stand, right, they haven't activated their proxies haven't been destroyed, the regime still has an ability to walk this back in a way that it survives. Their ideology hasn't changed. Their tactics may change, where their emphasis may change. But their ideology will not change, and that ideology remains this antipathy towards the West, this desire to challenge Western civilization, and at its forefront, the United States. Does that mean that they'll go back to rebuilding a nuclear weapons program immediately? Again, I think if enough Iranian nuclear scientists have been killed, that won't be as easy as just let's rebuild the buildings and restart the centrifuges. So it'll have to take, again, redeveloping the know-how, and that could take a long period of time. Look, I do think that the only way this ends, the only way that Iran's threat to the region, both conventional and from weapons of mass destruction, ends is with a change of this regime.
Okay.
It doesn't seem on the table now, but that does not mean that the nuclear weapons program will return in the immediate term, even if this regime survives.
Because some of the critics of this action tonight are saying and have said along the last week that they'll just restart it eventually. It's only a matter of time. They can regroup. So we'll just have to your point, wait and see. Let's talk about on the ground in Iran. We're anticipating, we're waiting to see if we see it. Any images or videos of the strikes themselves or the aftermath. So for our viewers who are keenly aware of that, we're looking for it. Haven't found it just yet. Were there people, everyday Iranians, who go to work at these sites each and every day? Were they there during the strikes or were they evacuated? Because something else that I've been discussing with experts like yourself, bombing with 6 bunker busters, those are 30,000-pound bombs each, nuclear sites, that dredges up a lot of radioactive material in the air, in the ground, in the wake of the explosions here. So are you looking at a potential kind of nuclear fallout from just the bombing of these sites in the air in Iran, on the ground in Iran? Do you think that's happening right now?
From what we're hearing, it's not happening now, and there's no immediate reports on civilian casualties or casualties among those who are working at the facilities. But as far as we can tell, there's, again, this is too soon to tell, but the Iranians aren't reporting any nuclear fallout. I will say about your earlier comment about the critics of the strike, look, perhaps this only delays Iran by a few years and that they will regroup eventually. But I think there's a benefit to distancing Iran as much as possible from possession of a nuclear weapon. This is a very dangerous regime. Prime Minister Netanyahu likes to call it the world's most dangerous regime. I think that's a question up for debate whether it is or it isn't, but it is a dangerous regime. It is a regime with a dangerous ideology. And we've seen the havoc that Iran can wreak without a nuclear weapon. Imagine what it could do if all of its militias and all of its regional destabilization had a nuclear umbrella behind it. So distancing this regime as much as possible from a weapon, even if it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however much it is, that is a net benefit to the United States. It's a net benefit to Israel. It's a net benefit to the international community. I don't know what if what these critics have as an alternative if Iran was indeed weeks or months away from a nuclear weapon. Is it not better? I pose the question back to them. Is it not better than to have them mere weeks and months away from a nuclear weapon, to have them 5 or 10 years away from a nuclear weapon?
Okay, so David, you just made the case to the critics that I have been kind of following all throughout the last 2 weeks here. What if they don't buy those arguments? What is the alternative to your point? Because the arguments of the critics are the United States does not need to enter into another foreign entanglement, a la the Iraq War, that this is not in U.S. national security interests. Of course, the president has said, no, it is. And he is kind of not really listening to some of those voices, even coming from within his own party here. So I think you expertly kind of made the case. But if one of those critics was on with us right now, I mean, how would you respond? What would your retort be to them?
I would say they don't understand the nature of the Iranian regime. Yes, they view this in kind of an immediate term threat assessment, where in the more immediate term, yes, the Iranians are a bigger threat to the state of Israel. Israel is the only country that Iran has slated for destruction. But at the same time, let's understand the reason for Iran's enmity towards Israel. It's not, I often like to say it's not that they hate us, the United States, because we support Israel. They hate Israel because it's an extension of the United States. And don't listen to David Daoud saying this. Listen to Hezbollah, which is an Iranian asset, saying this. I'm an expert on Hezbollah. This is what I know best. They keep calling Israel a forward military base and a tool of the United States. The narrative, even on the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war, is that Israel did not want to enter that war at the time, and the United States pushed a reluctant Israel to enter that war in order to create a new Middle East. The way they view the world is that the United States is, to quote Hezbollah, the head of corruption, the font of corruption, and everything flows from that, including Israel's military might. And the way that the Iranian regime views itself is that it is in this clash of civilizations, this Huntingtonian clash of civilizations with the West, which is primarily led by the United States. And it is their job, in order to push their view, their worldview, to weaken us in any way, shape, or form. So maybe they're not threatening us directly now, in the sense that the way they're ballistic missiles falling on Israel. But there is a broader threat, and there's a broader attempt by the Iranian regime and like-minded regimes to weaken the United States. And in doing so, that will threaten our way of life here in the United States. Again, it doesn't have to happen in a year or two, but over the long run, that is their intention. So setting this regime back, that's a separate question. I think mixing this up with an Iraq situation, you don't necessarily have to invade Iran and destroy the regime and engage in democracy building in order to prevent this regime from continuing to constitute a threat, both to its surroundings and, in the broader sense, to the United States and its interests.
David, lastly, though, what about the Iranian people? There's been this, some would call, kind of logical fallacy and maybe naivete going on, that in the wake of all of this, there would be this kind of organic, coming up of the Iranian people, that they would, pursue their self-determination now that, Israel has somewhat liberated them from the jackboot of the theocratic mullahs here. You haven't seen that. Are people naive to the fact that that's actually going to happen? What does your everyday Iranian think about what's going on? Do they like the regime? Do they want the regime gone? Is this positive, good news of what the United States did today, or no?
Look, I think it's a complicated question. Look, when we've spoken about this, when it comes to Lebanon, I've always said it's hard to just say what the Lebanese streets' opinion is. And I would say, I'm not an expert on Iran. I don't follow Iran very closely, or as closely as I do Lebanon. But I will say every side in the discussion over whether the Iranian regime has popular support or not has an interest in playing up their side. So the Iranian opposition to the regime has an interest in saying, we are the majority, we represent the Iranian people and the will of the Iranian people, and so does the Iranian regime. It's hard to tell on the ground, right? This is not a democracy where you can go in and get honest opinions from people. What we have not seen, however, maybe we've seen some smatterings on social media of people coming out and chanting against the regime. We've also seen demonstrations and people spontaneously speaking on behalf of the regime. So it's a very complicated image. What we have not seen, however, this military operation is still, we're still in the middle of this. So it's not done yet. So maybe it is too soon to speak. Maybe I am speaking prematurely. But what we have not seen now, what we can say for certain, is tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Iranians go out into the street, take this opportunity to go out into the street and finish off what's left of the regime. Is that because, again, there's an ongoing military operation and they're waiting for that to be done? Is that because the psyche of fear in which this Iranian regime has held the Iranian people? I mean, if you think about protest after protest going back to 2009 and even earlier, where people have protested this regime's actions, the regime has gotten more proficient at putting down these protests with the utmost brutality. So have you, as the Iranian people, or have these Iranians who oppose the regime lost the hope to come out and protest the regime? It's unclear. Again, I can't speak to the nitty-gritty of this.
Sure.
All I can say is that each side has the interest now in playing up their respective support.
All right. David Dawood, we're going to have to leave it at that. Always good to see you. Your insight is extremely valuable. We'll definitely be chatting soon, I would imagine. Thanks so much, David. Have a good night.
My pleasure.
Okay, in the meantime here, we're going to keep this going. We're going all night in our continuing coverage of what is very historic. I asked that question right off the top to David. Has the United States ever struck targets militarily inside the country of Iran? And no, that was the answer there. So in the meantime, remember, we're on the lookout for some of these visual aids, videos, photos inside Iran of the explosions themselves. Haven't seen them yet, confirmed. There's a lot kind of percolating out there on social media. We'll wait to confirm some of those images and media and bring those to you so you can see for yourselves the aftermath of some of these strikes inside of Iran at these 3 nuclear enrichment facilities. Let's put up the map yet again as we continue to bring in more expert analysis, reporters, guests. On deck is my friend and colleague at the Washington Examiner, Michael Brest. He covers the Pentagon each and every day. So there you can see. And I want to just read from President Trump's initial post on Truth Social, telling the world this is what the United States did. He said, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter." And I believe he posted yet again on Truth Social moments ago saying this: "Any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Thank you, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States." And I think it's a safe question. Probably a lot of you have. What will Iran do in response? What will that even look like? Also, we're getting kind of a inside view into the Situation Room. The White House putting out new photos of the moments that these strikes were ongoing as the president's national security team were witnessing it in the room itself. This is from the White House. Take a look at some of these photos there. You see the vice president in the foreground, of course, Secretary of State Rubio. So the White House just releasing these. You also see Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Kane, also White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, also Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. So this is courtesy of the White House. These are extremely new images from the Situation Room. In the background there, Dan Scavino, White House Communications Director, and President Trump seated there at the head of the table in the Make America Great Again hat, the red hat, the iconic red hat. So in the meantime, remember, at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, that's 5 a.m. Pacific time, at the Pentagon, there will be a press briefing from Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I would imagine that my friend and colleague, Mike Brest there at the Washington Examiner, will be on hand for that. We're going to bring him into the conversation momentarily here. Take a look at this live picture there at the White House. So in the meantime, like I said, Mike Brest, he is on standby. He joins me. Mike, so good of you to be with us. I know it's late there in Washington. I would imagine, like I said, you're going to be at the press conference very early tomorrow morning, so we'll keep this short. What question would you ask, will you ask, if you get the chance, to Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
So I think on a very basic level, there are questions that that need answering in terms of confirmation, uh, what troops were involved in the mission, what exactly were their targets. We're still a little early in terms of battle damage assessments, but any initial reads on just sort of how successful the mission was. And then to look forward, a question that I'm wondering is how exactly have they gone about preparing U.S. bases in the region should they come under attack from Iran in retaliation? And so I think when we look ahead, that has to be one of the major sort of viewpoints that we have to look at and sort of see exactly how this plays out. A lot of it will be sort of determined based on Iran's response at this point.
So, Mike, I have to ask, let's kind of walk our viewers back. Earlier in the day, there was so much reporting about the B-2 bombers, 6 of them that were flying, it was reported, to the west toward Guam. Jennifer Griffin, our colleague at Fox, who reports alongside you at the Pentagon, said this, that the true flight path was likely east directly toward Iran and what appears to have been a calculated deception. I'm not a military expert by any means. A B-2 plane, a B-2 jet, what is it? What is its payload? Obviously, a very large payload in order to carry a 30,000-pound bomb. Those bunker buster bombs, 30,000 pounds each. We used 6 of them. Also, we use multiple Tomahawk missiles here. If you could, walk us through the materiel that was used.
So, as you mentioned, the B-2 bombers are housed at a military base in Missouri. So that's where they took off from. As Jen Griffin reported, it seems like all the reporting we saw about some of the B-2s going west was actually somewhat of a deception. It shouldn't be hard, or that shouldn't be too difficult to think through or prove, considering the Pentagon announced earlier in the week that they had forward positioned a refueler aircraft in Europe. And so the refueler aircraft allow for the B-2 bomber to be refueled while in the air. So there is a possibility that these B-2s went right from Missouri to the Middle East and back, having to be refueled in the air several times, but that is a possibility. And then, as you mentioned, these bombers carry, or in this instance, we've been told carried the 30,000. It's called the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. It's one of the largest non-nuclear weapons the U.S. has, and it's specifically designed to hit a hardened underground target. So that's exactly why they were using it to hit the nuclear facilities in Iran that were underground.
So, Mike, you remember that some of the debate throughout the last week was, especially in U.S. defense circles, even within the White House, it was reported that Trump and others, they weren't so sure that the bunker buster bombs could do the job. Has that been disabused as of tonight, according to the president? The president is saying that nuclear weapons, the nuclear program rather of Iran has been completely obliterated. So all the worry that the bunker busters might not do the job, was that much ado about nothing or no?
Well, so I think it's a little too early to tell exactly, because the president sort of gave an overall assessment of the operation, but we don't know any of the specifics. We haven't seen or heard about the destruction that was actually caused. And so I think it's a little too early, but part of the reason there was this concern or this mystery about whether or not using these bombs would be successful is because the U.S. Air Force has never gone on record saying they've ever used it before. So the fact that this is the first time they've actually dropped the bomb is in and of itself a new experience for the military. So they're probably still
Mike,
evaluating the success.
Can you reiterate that point, Mike? Can you reiterate that point? I think that's very significant. You just said the United States military has never publicly acknowledged the use of these bunker buster bombs until today.
Yes, exactly. And so it's really hard to see even how the U.S. would be able to know the success of it this soon after.
Okay.
And so I'm sure in the days and weeks ahead, and I'm sure the Secretary and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will probably give some level of an update tomorrow, but it could be several days, if not a couple of weeks, before we get a full understanding of how successful these massive ordnance penetrator bombs were. And I'm sure a lot of that information will be classified, and we'll find out from the unclassified details that emerge.
All right, let's talk about what other questions you might ask. Of course, we're going to be showing the press conference in full tomorrow live. What else do you want to know? What does Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs need to first explain? You know, how they did this, how it was carried out, how it was executed, the help. What else do you want to know?
I think there are a lot of questions in terms of how long has this been in the planning? There's been some disagreement about the assessment on how close Iran was to actually getting a nuclear weapon. I think these are questions that the Pentagon should discuss, in part because they haven't been briefing reporters or haven't held a briefing in the last week since this war got underway. So there are a lot of questions. I would love to ask questions about uh, the U.S.'s involvement in the defense of Israel. We heard from sources within the building that they were involved in intercepting Israeli missiles or Iranian missiles heading for Israel, excuse me, but we don't know how many. We don't know how successful the U.S. was in their efforts. And so there's a lot that the Pentagon will be asked about because they haven't briefed since Israel and Iran went to war a week and a half ago now.
Now, they haven't only just not briefed since then. From what I understand, there's only been, because we would air it in its entirety here on LiveNOW, there's only been one full Pentagon press briefing in the briefing room since President Trump took office a second time in January. Do I have that right?
That is correct. So the first briefing was right after the Houthi bombing campaign began a couple months ago. And so that was with the head of, or the chief spokesman of the Pentagon, Sean Parnell. Secretary Hegseth has not been in the Pentagon briefing room to take questions from reporters, so this will actually be our first time getting the opportunity to ask him some questions.
Okay, I just wanted to note that point because obviously we get near daily White House press briefings, we get near daily State Department briefings. The Pentagon is, somewhat different, and you correct me if I'm wrong here. You cover the Pentagon each and every day. That is unusual and unorthodox, compared with previous presidential administrations, right?
It is. The current administration has taken a very different tact as it relates to how it tries to relay information to the American people.
Okay, Mike, always glad to have you on. I know it's late there in Washington, and I'm sure we'll be speaking in the next couple of days. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, we are approaching a new hour. It's almost 8 o'clock here on the West Coast, almost 11 p.m. there in Washington. And so at the top of the hour, we're going to take the opportunity to let you listen to the very brief statement President Trump made there in the White House. Standing behind him, of course, was the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and also the Secretary of Defense. After that, in addition, we also have a video message from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, thanking the Trump administration. We're also getting more and more reaction from world leaders as well on social media, including from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. We'll have that for you. We're also on the lookout for more and more of these statements from world leaders. We've gotten a lot of congressional reaction. We'll kind of go through that as well here from the relevant committees. Remember, it was reported, courtesy of our colleague Chad Pergram there on Capitol Hill, that the Trump White House did give congressional leaders a heads up on this and also gave Israel a heads up on this too. So stay tuned. Like I said, I'm Andrew Kraft. We are going throughout the evening nonstop here with continuing coverage of a historic first, June 21st. Remember this day, 2025, the United States striking targets inside Iran militarily for the first time. 8 o'clock here on the dot. In the meantime, though, like I said, let's re-rack it for you in case you haven't seen it just yet. This was the statement from President Trump now about an hour ago.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, that was the brief message there from President Trump at the White House now about an hour ago, in case you might have missed it there live. In the meantime, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanking the president for these actions just tonight. He put this video message online. Let's watch.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
Okay, there, Bibi Netanyahu with that message. We're also garnering reaction as well from many world leaders, including there at the United Nations, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, with this message. He says this: "I'm gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today, saying this is a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security. There is a growing risk that this conflict could rapidly get out of control, with catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, and the world." He says, "I call on member states to de-escalate and to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter and other rules of international law. At this perilous hour, it is critical to avoid a spiral of chaos. There is no military solution. The only path forward is diplomacy. The only hope is peace." Coming there, the message from the United Nations. So I would imagine that come next week, the UN Security Council will convene, maybe on an emergency basis, to discuss this. It was a key focal point of our coverage on Friday. You heard from the Israeli ambassador. You heard from the Iranian ambassador there at the Security Council. In the meantime, speaking of New York City, remember, we're garnering reaction as well from local and state elected leaders here stateside. We're hearing from the NYPD. Take a look at this. They say this: that we're tracking the situation unfolding in Iran. Out of an abundance of caution, we're deploying additional resources to religious, cultural, and diplomatic sites across New York City and coordinating with our federal partners. We'll continue to monitor for any potential impact to New York City. Also, live picture there in Los Angeles, over the airport there at LAX. We are hearing from California Governor Gavin Newsom. Take a look at this. He says, following the president's action in Iran, California's State Threat Assessment Center is actively monitoring for any potential impacts in California. He says, while there are no specific or credible counter threats we are aware of at this time, we urge everyone to stay vigilant and to report anything they may see. So the message coming from California Governor Gavin Newsom, kind of a coast-to-coast reaction there. In the meantime, though, we do want to continue with so many of our experts, analysts, reporters who really cover this each and every day. It's their job, the Middle East, including my friend now there, political scientist at UCLA, Benjamin Rad. He joins me. Benjamin, good to see you here. You and I were speaking, I believe, on Friday, and now here we are. Your initial reaction, how momentous of an occasion is this, not just for the United States, not just for kind of the Middle East? Is this a watershed moment? Would you characterize it as thus?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still trying to catch my breath of the events of the last few hours. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, since 1979, when it was conceived, has been a foil in the foreign policy objectives and in the stability of the Middle East for the United States and for other regional allies and global allies for a very long time now. And this is a monumental shift in what that dynamic is going to look like. If the United States is able to effectively dismantle or cripple Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, it sends in a very, very powerful message, and it undermines Iran's ability not only to threaten allies and others in the region, but to project that power beyond its borders through its proxy groups. The message has been sent loud and clear, and the question now is sort of not just whether these installations have been sufficiently set back, but whether or not Iran's own system of government is facing a crisis as it decides how it's going to respond. And it is not, and it does not have any good options in front of it. So that's the other element here. Not only do we have the nuclear component, which is huge, and it's been a problem since the 1990s, but now we also have a crisis of survival, of legitimacy of Iran's theocratic system.
So a lot of those questions, I would argue, maybe you agree with me, right now are extremely unanswerable. I'm going to ask them anyway because we're still so early into this. So that is the question now. What does Iran's nuclear program look like at this stage? Israel kind of set the preemptive stage for it, the entree to the strikes at so many of the nuclear facilities. And the United States kind of came up from the rear and helped them take out really the three crown jewels of the program itself: Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan here. So what is left? Will we know? How will we know? Will the IAEA tell us that Iran no longer has the capability to enrich? Will Iran eventually, time will tell, start up a program again 10, 15, 20 years down the road? What is the capability right now? And even before the U.S. strikes, I had asked you, what damage Israel had done to it. Now the U.S., according to President Trump, finishing it off carte blanche completely. That seems to be the sense. But to my previous question, how will we know?
Yeah, and so the Iranian officials indicated on social media and in reports a few hours ago that they've spent the last 7 days moving highly enriched uranium components and materials out of these facilities and into other secure areas. Now, again, they could be bluffing. We don't know if this is the case, but let's assume that Iran managed to get something out. Let's assume that and let's also go on the assumption that most of these facilities have been destroyed permanently, if not indefinitely. What remains is Iran's know-how, is the knowledge that its chief nuclear scientists possess, those who are still alive, and there's probably a good number that are alive. They still have the knowledge and the know-how to recreate or replicate the work they've done. They just now need facilities to do it. So to know effectively what's happened to Iran's nuclear weapons program requires either the IAEA getting access to the existing facilities without any restrictions. That's one option. The other option is to basically have Iran say, okay, we hear this now. We are willing to abandon nuclear enrichment as a whole, or to outsource it to other countries, which was the deal that the United States had offered earlier this month that was rejected. Or Iran could step on the gas and say, you know what, not only are we not going to stop enriching, we're going to accelerate, and we're going to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because under that treaty, we have the rights to do so for energy purposes, and the United States violated international law by denying us that right. So there's multiple options. We simply don't know which path they will choose, because that's all part of this escalation ladder, which is the metaphor that's being used.
Let's put up the map again here. Jennifer Griffin has, I think, some really great reporting. It's kind of niche. It gets into the weeds, and you can help us kind of elucidate it. She says, I'm told by experts that the underground tunnel at Isfahan is a much harder target than Fordow, and it's not clear whether the Tomahawks were able to destroy it. A source says to her, there's no way they got in that tunnel. It's deeper than the calm and harder rock, according to a well-placed. She reports IAEA inspectors reported multiple times it was used for storage of UF6. Now, UF6 was one of the large precursor materials to make enriched uranium, but there was no enrichment going on inside of that mountain. She says it's important that the UF6, which is uranium hexafluoride, be accounted for and eventually removed. Isfahan is where Iran also manufactured centrifuges. So could it be that Isfahan was actually more important than Fordow?
So it appears that what was happening in Esfahan was that you were having the enrichment done at the secret facility in Fordow, where the most advanced centrifuges were developed or were running. And then that material was taken out of Fordow and being stored in Esfahan. So you have production in Fordow, you have storage and maintenance and possibly conversion to, putting onto a warhead, that type of development happening in Esfahan. So two different facilities doing two different things. Now, whether or not you can destroy Esfahan, one can with the proper munitions, basically cripple access to it. So maybe the facility still stands, maybe the tunnels, maybe bunkers, maybe a huge size, depots, maybe halls, whatever facilities are still intact. But access to them, which requires a tunnel entrance above ground, those can be crippled. Those can be eliminated or denied or compromised. You can reaccess them, you can rebuild them, but there'll be satellites watching all of this happen to see if there's any more activity there. So again, we don't know for certain until we have either visual satellite intelligence or on the ground human intelligence verifying one way or the other. This is all speculation.
So obviously, within 2 weeks didn't mean a full 2 weeks. It meant within 2 days. So I thought that was somewhat telling and prescient, since we were talking about, kind of parsing the language of, what did the president mean saying he needed 2 weeks' time to think. Remember, the Wall Street Journal earlier this week had reported that he had already made up his mind, and he was off to Bedminster, New Jersey yesterday, came back to the Situation Room just today, and we have some pictures put out by the White House here. Benjamin, just lastly, I wanted to ask, was Iran caught off guard? Or did they know or think that this was coming? Were they completely surprised?
Nothing indicated that they were prepared for this. We didn't see any massive movements. We didn't, at least nothing we were able to detect. There's no intelligence that came out that said Iran was prepping for this. And I think very much they were caught off guard. I think they were willing to accept that maybe not 2 weeks, but it definitely would last for longer than 2 days. We know that there are attempts at diplomacy with the Europeans. And reports came out that even Turkey had offered to help. maybe they were waiting to see where that was going to go. It was going to be revisited. So I think that this very quick 48 hours came as a shock to them.
All right, Benjamin Rad there, as always. Can't thank you enough. I guess I have to ask this. I know I always say lastly, but I always think of another question. What are you looking for going into the week now? Will there be retaliation? That's what I'm looking for, and I would imagine Americans are probably asking themselves the same thing here. It was also reported in Axios yesterday, I believe, that there was some type of brokering, at least attempted, with Turkey as an intermediary between the United States and Iran. It was reported President Trump was thinking that he wanted to meet directly with Iranian officials, but the Ayatollah could not be reached. Erdogan of Turkey was kind of brokering all of this. And then, all for naught, it didn't go anywhere here. Can you envision some type of meeting or summit between U.S. officials, high-ranking, not Steve Witkoff, but the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, President himself, with Iranian officials? Is that on the table, you think, or no, after this?
So if it's one thing that officials of any high rank, especially president or cabinet level secretary, doesn't want to do is he or she doesn't want to engage in a meeting or a summit where they know ahead of time a deal is unlikely. It looks bad for them. And so in this instance, we know where Iran's red lines were. They haven't signaled otherwise. Their red lines have been, they insist on maintaining a peaceful enrichment program. And that they were not going to compromise on, unless they indicated through back channels they were willing to yield on that. And to do so would be a 180, and they'd have to account for that with their own public. It's difficult to see why or how those high-level officials would meet. Now, it's tempting, and I think the offer from the president was genuine, but I'm not sure if at the end of the day it would have materialized for other reasons, and that being one of them. I simply don't see a deal under the conditions that each side wanted happening.
All right, Benjamin Rad, always good to see you, and thank you so much for providing such great insight, especially this late at night. Benjamin, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, I think it's safe to kind of reset, catch our breath as we continue this breaking news coverage. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to my colleague, Austin Westfall. He was on when it happened, and we're continuing right through of this momentous, historic occasion there, not only here, stateside, but also in the Middle East here. We have live pictures there on Capitol Hill, also at the White House as well. We've heard from President Trump multiple times. They have issued photos in the Situation Room of when this all was going down. And if we could put up the most recent post on Truth Social, in case you haven't seen it just yet, I want to read it to you. So this is what the president says, that any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. He says, thank you, Donald Trump, President of the United States. So, like I said, we're going to be bringing in more and more guests to help us make sense of this moment. We're also going to be garnering reaction from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Let's go back to Capitol Hill. There are some critics of this move coming from Democrats who have said that the president needed congressional authorization for this under the War Powers Resolution, i.e. a vote of Congress to authorize these strikes. That did not happen, of course, you know that. So we'll be highlighting some of those. So like I said, we do want to bring into the conversation right now folks there at the Atlantic Council, including Jonathan Panikoff. He joins me. Jonathan, thanks for being with us. I know it's very late, but we have to get to so many of my questions. I know you have a lot of questions here. Jonathan, I think it's safe to say, maybe let's take stock of what has transpired over the last 12 months in the Middle East. I'm thinking of last July, late July, when Ismail Haniyeh went to Tehran for the funeral of the previous Iranian president, and he was assassinated there in Tehran at the guest house. And then fast forward to last fall, when Israel was taking out Hezbollah targets left and right, including the leader, the cleric Hassan Nasrallah, and lest we forget also the extraordinary pager and walkie-talkie operation, really decimating Hezbollah and its ranks. They've taken the fight to the Houthis throughout the course of this since, October 8th, 2023. And then, of course, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria in December. And then in the middle of all of that, you had Iran strike Israel twice. That had never happened before. And now we have something that has never happened before either. The United States striking targets kinetically, militarily inside of Iran. It's dizzying when you put it all together, when you stack it all up. I've probably left so much out. But it's safe to say the Middle East has transformed in all of that time, and especially tonight. Would you agree, Jonathan?
Thanks for having me this evening. Yes, I absolutely would agree. I think the way you contextualized it is actually an incredibly important point. This war did not start, frankly, in October of last year when you had Israel and Iran really engage in the second of kinetic engagements, nor did it start in April. It didn't start with Hezbollah. It really started October 7th. And there's a direct line of everything that happened from Hamas's terrorist attack October 7th, 2023 until today. I think sometimes it's not quite clear where these things are going to go. And I think what you're going to see is, frankly, we don't know right now how the Middle East is going to be changed, but it's going to be changed. It's going to depend on Iran's response here. One pathway is a relatively small response, a narrow response that Iran gets to stand up and say, look, it responded. It can respond to hardliners and those supporting the regime saying we stood up for Iran, stood against the U.S., but intending not to really do significant harm or damage. And maybe all of this now ends without an Iranian nuclear program that opens up great opportunities in the region. The second possibility, of course, is incredibly dangerous because it's that Iran's regime feels like it's really under threat for its own survival and says, we're going to have to go for broke almost and engage all the proxies it has remaining, weaken though they are, its capabilities it has remaining, and heavily escalates the situation. The U.S. has to respond, and now we're talking about a longer-term regional conflict that nobody quite knows where it's going to end. We're going to see in the coming days which of these pathways plays out.
Yeah, aside from the military response to all of this, and it was lauded and touted by President Trump in his statement, how do you think the Trump administration, his Defense Department, his State Department, and his National Security Council handled all of this? What grade would you give them? And I just want to kind of cite something I just saw on social media. Brett McGurk, if our viewers don't know who that is, former Middle East special envoy in both the Obama and Biden administrations, he said this, that if anyone tells you they know where this is going, they don't know what they're talking about. And I think it's safe to say most of our experts throughout the course of this evening have maintained that line. There's a lot of unknowns, aren't there?
There's a tremendous amount. Look, Brett's a colleague of mine at the Atlantic Council now.
That's why I brought it up.
I completely agree with Brett here, 100%. I think anybody that tells you they know where this is going is either lying or just naive, frankly. The reality is there's multiple pathways that this could go. Iran really has two big choices to make about how it's going to respond in the short term, and then whether or not it's going to try again for some reason to get a nuclear weapon and a nuclear program going. Those two things are really going to define the future here. But in the immediate, nobody really knows. We're all, frankly, waiting and waiting nervously. But I also think, look, the Trump administration has clearly put in a lot of thought militarily in terms of options. It moved U.S. assets into the region to try to protect against a big Iranian response or even a small one, and we'll see if it's successful defensively. It's tried hard to engage in some diplomatic efforts. I think there'll be questions about whether it tried enough over the last few days. There's been some criticism that, look, it had more days to go in President Trump's 14-day timeline. Others will say, no, look, the Iranians simply didn't respond. So what was there to engage? There's a lot more to come out of this to try to look back and see, was this right or was this wrong? Nobody knows that quite yet.
I mean, if you're the Iranian foreign minister and you've been meeting with Steve Witkoff for the last 6 weekends in Europe and also in Oman, was that all a charade? Could they have made a deal knowing what just transpired tonight? Are they, the Iranians, kicking themselves for not having made a deal after what happened tonight? I mean, why wouldn't they be?
You know, I think there's a mix. Iran is not monolithic in its thinking. You do have a number of folks, including Arachi, the Iranian foreign minister, who was the prime interlocutor with Steve Witkoff, who I think, yes, probably would have preferred to have made a deal and wish that they could have gotten one sooner. I think at the same time, you probably have hardliners who are skeptical and not particularly ever interested in making a deal in Iran. I think it's a mix, but certainly tonight, I think the question is going to be, is there really room for diplomacy, as the president had put back on the table? And it won't be diplomacy over a nuclear program as much as it will be diplomacy to end the war as it stands now and to move forward into, frankly, a very changed region.
I mean, clearly, these regimes, they're described by many as rogue regimes like Iran is. They don't go down without a fight, especially when it's a burgeoning nuclear weapons program that they want to hold at all costs. So is it naive to think that they will ever give it up?
Well, I think the question is going to be, what is there to give up? In other words, if the U.S. was successful in destroying Fordo, in destroying Natanz, and destroying what remained of Esfahan, the latter two really started by Israeli destruction about a little over a week ago, then it in some ways ironically makes it a little easier for Iran to negotiate because there isn't anything to frankly give up anymore. You can talk about a right to enrichment either way. But if you've now been set back, that you don't have the centrifuges available, if you're not spinning in the cascades, then it in some ways makes it easier. I think you're always going to have some level of hardliners who say, we want to rebuild. This is fundamental to our identity. We've gone on saying for years, this is critical. We're going to have to kind of wait and see, I think, ultimately what the totality of the result was from the strikes. But it's going to have a big impact, therefore, on what diplomatic course of action is actually possible.
All right, we have the map up here. We also, I think, just got this live picture as the sun now up on a Sunday morning there in Jerusalem. You can see there the Dome of the Rock in the distance. If you could, what is the, I guess, overall global reaction going to be to this? Let's take the U.S. and Israel and Iran out of it for now. What's Europe going to say? What's Saudi Arabia going to say? What's China going to say? What's Russia going to say? I just read out what the UN is saying. They are condemning this, Guterres, the Secretary General. What about all of them, Jonathan?
I think it's going to be mixed. Look, I don't think you're going to get anybody that publicly meaningfully endorses it. I think German Chancellor Merz was probably closest in terms of supporting Israel in comments that he made a couple of days ago regarding how the Iranian nuclear program has been an existential threat to Israel. I expect European allies, the E3, France, Germany, and the UK, to be quite tempered in their responses. But I also think that there's a slight difference. Certainly, you're going to get public condemnation, for instance, from many of the Gulf states who are terrified that the retaliation is going to come against them. But I think privately, the messaging is going to be a little bit different. You're probably going to get a number of the Gulf states, the Emiratis, for instance, probably the Saudis, who are quite happy about the fact that the U.S. has taken out Iran's nuclear program. You're going to get some in Europe who believe, look, this was actually the right thing to do. And I think it sends a different message as well to a number of Asian allies who have been questioning, look, in the event of China's move on Taiwan, in the event of real hostilities, will the U.S. be there and be supportive? And this might give them some belief that, oh, actually, look, the U.S. isn't just retreating from the world when really there's a challenge, when there's real concern over something existential, the U.S. will support its greatest allies. For Russia, it has to be a huge concern because it's just another ally in the region that they've now really seen diminished. We've seen them really take a loss in terms of Syria, the investment they've made. Iran has been a big ally. And for China, the real concern is the Strait of Hormuz. Does it remain open so that oil can continue to ship? If it closes, then the Chinese are going to be privately just as upset as I'm sure they are publicly right now.
Okay, let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know if you can see it in this map. You can see it in the map. Does Iran have a unilateral power to shut that strait off to shipping? And if they do, could that be an arrow in their retaliatory quiver?
So I think it is an arrow. They can shut it off. They can blockade it. The question is for how long? In other words, you have about a fifth of all global oil goes through the straits. About a quarter of LNG, of liquefied natural gas, goes through the straits. That's going to have an impact on the entirety of the world. And the Iranians will face obviously significant pressure to reopen it. And the question is, look, will you see kinetic strikes be taken by the US or by allies to force it to be reopened? I also think it's a challenge for Iran, because if Iran closes it, then it's going to be impacting actually one of the few, I won't say friends, but one of the few allies it has in China. China's incredibly, I won't say dependent, but significantly uses what is illicit black market Iranian oil and needs it for their own economic growth, their own economic viability. And so if you close it, you're going to see prices skyrocket around the world on both oil and natural gas. And so it's a bit of a double-edged sword for the Iranians. They can do it, but it comes with risks themselves for them doing it, especially over a medium or long-term period.
And Jonathan, just lastly, I like to take the 30,000-foot view sometimes for the last question here. Was this all inevitable, kind of the arc of history going toward this tonight, that the U.S. would eventually and inevitably have to do this? Elections obviously have consequences. President Trump was ushered back into the White House last November. And now he has said all along, he said on the campaign trail, Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. He had the door open for 60 days for diplomacy, and then that door was shut, and he decided ultimately to take military action here. Let's go all the way back to the Obama administration, the JCPOA. Trump, first term, he pulls out of that. That was the Iran nuclear deal at the time. I've been asking some guests, hindsight is 2020, if we were still in that deal right now, would we be here tonight?
Look, I don't think it was inevitable that we got here through any part of this. Okay. Leaders make decisions, and the idea that somehow it's just a system that's running it, I think both President Trump and even President Obama have very much that that's not true by the decisions that they themselves make that can change the arc of history. I think that the JCPOA, for all of the many flaws that it had significant ones, was actually doing the job. Iran was set back significantly, and so I don't know that you would have been here tonight anyways if President Trump had not put out in his first term. He made the decision to do so. President Biden, I thought rightly, didn't just jump back into it, to his credit. And then look, the 60 days expired, but I have to be honest, it's not clear to me that the Iranians knew that that timeline was even still a fundamental one in place when the Israelis struck, right? I think they saw, as you said, there had been 5 rounds of negotiations. We were preparing for the 6th. I think it really took them by surprise that the Israelis were willing to go that far. And so I think, again, history is dependent on the decisions leaders make. We saw another one tonight. Where it ultimately leads, I think, is yet to be written.
Yeah, I mean, some of the critics of these actions, and including the Israeli actions, are kind of calling this adventurism, for another foreign entanglement the U.S. is getting involved with. You hear the term forever war. You also hear the term nation building, kind of all of those terms from a bygone era at the outset of the Iraq War in 2003. And that's kind of rearing its head tonight. And so I thought that was quite interesting. But there are a lot of U.S. assets in the Middle East, military personnel, a lot of American citizens as well. Is it right to be concerned about their safety tonight?
Of course, 100%. Look, I think the Iranians are going to retaliate one way or the other. The question of whether this escalates significantly is about how narrow that retaliation is, or whether they widen it out and make it as intense as possible. At the end of the day, I think the Iranians have that choice to make. But either way, you have significant U.S. forces in Iraq, significant U.S. forces out at Al-Udeid in Qatar, and significant forces at Navcent in Bahrain, in Manama. That's not to say anything of the many forces that have now flowed into the region as the Pentagon and the White House, of course, have set up the potential to have to defend those already in region. And so you've got more naval assets and more personnel that have now flowed in. They are at risk. I think the U.S. evacuations from many of their embassies and many other installations made sense when it happened, to happen right before Israeli strikes. Now I think we're going to see it probably pay off because it lowers the risk for non-essential personnel, but there's a lot of soldiers and a lot of forces that will still be at risk.
All right, Jonathan Panikoff there with the Atlantic Council. I know it's late, Jonathan. Can't thank you enough. I'm sure we'll be speaking very, very soon. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, we're going to keep it going. We're a little past the bottom of the hour. It's now 8:35 on the West Coast, 11:35 now in Washington there. And I want to put this up from the Associated Press. Take a look at this. So we're hearing yet again from Iran. They say there are no signs of contamination after U.S. airstrikes targeted nuclear facilities at Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz. Now, remember, that was a key question I was asking some of our experts. If you're bombing all of these nuclear sites like the United States did tonight, won't there be some type of radioactive fallout in the air, on the ground, to the civilian population? And you see there, Iran says this, no signs of contamination. Now, in the meantime, I want to show you yet again live picture there at the White House. If we could put up that tweet from Jennifer Griffin. Just want to preview this. Remember, we are anticipating in several hours, it's not for some time, that there's going to be this live press conference there at the Pentagon tomorrow. All right, Jennifer Griffin saying Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, will hold a press briefing at the Pentagon tomorrow, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. So, of course, we will be showing you that live in its entirety there at the Pentagon in the briefing room, and I would imagine that many of you will be watching. So we're going to hold that up. We're going to keep bringing in experts and analysts. I know a lot of you are watching right now. I want to thank you for watching. This is what we do here on LiveNOW from Fox. So in the meantime, we do have some of these other live vantage points in the Middle East. They're in Jerusalem, yet another one in Jerusalem as well here. All right, so like I said, always have these vantage points in the Middle East. But in the meantime, we do have to bring into the conversation Michael Makovsky, senior analyst there at JINSA. We've been relying on JINSA throughout the course of the last several days. They're a great resource, and Michael joins me. Michael, thanks for being with us. We're going to keep this up here. We do want to bring you into the conversation. I know it's very, very late here. I just kind of previewed for you and for our viewers the Pentagon press briefing that will take place tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. If you were sitting in there as a reporter, what would you be asking the Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
Well, I'd want to know more details, obviously, that's been reported right now. So I'd ask them about that. I'd like to have some idea about maybe how we're postured in the region in case the Iranians try to retaliate. Those would be my initial thing. That's my initial instinct about what to ask.
Let's focus on kind of the Israeli angle to all of this. We did give Israel a heads up that we were going to do this tonight. Bibi Netanyahu has responded in a video message. We'll get to that a little bit later on here. But now Iran is facing two fronts in this, from the United States and from Israel. Now, the United States says, that's it. We're not going to do anything else unless Iran decides to retaliate here. So how can Iran maneuver this with Israel and the United States firing at it? I know Iran's firing back, but only back at Israel.
Right. So, first of all, let me just, if I may, just say one thing. I think it's a tremendous thing what President Trump did. I commend him for this, and I commend him for also rejecting some of the naysayers among the isolationists in the Republican Party for doing this. I think it's clear. You keep hearing this before, and this will get to answer your question. This is Israel's fight. We shouldn't get involved. No. President Trump made it clear this is America's fight, too. 5 presidents in a row, Democrats and Republicans, vowed to do what President Trump and the Israelis are doing now. And now President Trump's the only one actually to do something about it concretely. So this is America's fight. The Iranians are our enemies. President Trump laid that out in his speech. And it would have been, and it's a very important signal also to our adversaries like the Chinese and the Russians, also to our allies, that we did it, that we're going to advance our interests and we're going to stand by our close allies. So I think it's very important to say up front. And to answer your question about the Iranians, look, what they should do, but I'm not expecting them to do it, is say, is to pretty much cry uncle, say you're right, and and try to cut some deal that pretty much eliminates their whole nuclear program. But they're not going to do that, I don't think. The big question is, are they going to try to retaliate against U.S. Military assets, soldiers, or Americans anywhere in the world? I hope they don't, because I think they should listen to what President Trump said, because the U.S. will retaliate extremely strongly on that. And that'll be the end of the regime for sure.
So, Michael, what else does Israel have up its sleeve? They wanted the United States' help with striking these facilities tonight. The United States did it. Somewhat bizarrely, Bibi Netanyahu yesterday said that, if the United States decides not to, they can still do whatever they will. The United States, of course, ultimately decided to strike these targets. So is that it? Does Israel have more up its sleeve now?
Yeah, I do. And by the way, I think, Netanyahu said that because the fact is that if President Trump didn't do this, Israel would have to do it in a way it could. It could not do it in the way America did today or tonight, but Israel would do it its way. It wouldn't be as good, but it would have to do it. So I think that's why Netanyahu said that. I don't know, with the Israelis, obviously, I think we've learned over the last 9 days, and we've learned now for over a year from the Israelis that don't underestimate what they could do, because it's been very impressive militarily. And I think what they need to do, continue to do, look, they have freedom of air. I mean, they could fly over the country because they have completely disabled Iran's air defenses. So I think the Israelis might want to keep cleaning up on the ballistic missiles. The threat is not just the nuclear weapons, however really important that is. It's also the ballistic missiles. So I think they're going to do whatever they can to kind of clean that up in the country. And they'll also have to do an assessment of what needs to be done anymore on the nuclear side. They want to make sure that they've destroyed the enriched uranium. So there's probably going to have to be an assessment about that. And by the way, that would be something, if I was a journalist, I would be asking in the press conference tomorrow morning, what conference do we have about the enriched uranium? Is there anything the United States is going to do, et cetera?
Politically, throughout this entire conversation, in the run-up to these strikes, I had been kind of noting and acknowledging some fractures within the president's coalition in the Republican base, and even those who work for him, including his director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. 2 times in the last week, he said that Gabbard was wrong about intelligence indicating Iran was very close to obtaining and producing a nuclear weapon. I think this is interesting reporting from Jennifer Griffin. She says the White House says that Tulsi Gabbard was in the Situation Room tonight, even though no photos were released that showed her there. Does this put to bed some of the critics within Trump's own coalition about whether or not he should have done this tonight?
Well, I would like to think so, but they're pretty hard. And you got Tucker Carlson is another one. Even the vice president, J.D. Vance, has expressed a lot of reservations. Obviously, not as much as like Tucker Carlson claiming all sorts of horrors are going to come about. But my hope is, yes, as I think President Trump said, he created MAGA. So he'll declare what that means. And peace cannot involve, and you can't have peace if you're going to have a nuclear Iran. And I hope people, those in his base that have opposed this strike will heed what the president said, because I think he's completely right. This was an America first strike.
All right, Michael Makovsky there with Jinta. Michael, thanks for being with us. I know it's late. We'll definitely be speaking soon.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Have a good night.
In the meantime here, speaking of Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, I want to just show you this, if you haven't seen it just yet, a video posted, about a couple of hours ago, Netanyahu thanking President Trump for what he did tonight. Let's watch this.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
All right, that was the message there from Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu. It was reported that the Trump administration, President Trump himself, spoke on the phone with Netanyahu, indicating that the U.S. gave a heads up to the Israelis that this was taking place. That's been reported here. In the meantime, though, more conversations, more analysis, especially from our friends and colleagues at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. They've been so instrumental in helping us here at LiveNOW explain what is an extremely complex conflict, especially after tonight. And that's, of course, their executive director, Jonathan Schanzer. He joins me. Jonathan, good to see you here. I know you're extremely, extremely busy. I guess simplistically, I got to ask this. So what now? What next? Do we know?
Well, I think we're going to get a BDA tomorrow, a battle damage assessment. We're going to get that probably 8 o'clock in the morning. I understand that's what Donald Trump said in his speech, that short speech that he gave, indicating that the Pentagon will do the technical work, right? They're listening right now to the communications of the Iranians. They're trying to get pictures if there were cameras inside the Fordo facility that was destroyed, as well as the other two. They want to just get a sense of how much was actually destroyed, whether there's anything left of the nuclear program. There are, of course, questions about the nuclear material, specifically at the Isfahan facility. There is, I think, still a desire to try to remove that if it's possible, although it may be that the U.S. has damaged it so much that it's now entombed, if you will, in whatever is left of that facility. But really, I think when you talk about now what, I think the question is, number one, will the regime capitulate? Will it surrender? And my understanding is the Israelis may have even stopped their attacks for a time to give the Iranian regime an opportunity to weigh its options and to potentially say whatever the word is in Farsi for uncle. That's what I think they're hoping they say, because they don't want to do this anymore. I think they've sustained a bunch of damage, but I do think that the regime seems defiant right now. I think we've already seen at least one drone fired out of Iran into Israeli airspace, and there's more coming. I think in the region, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, they're all very nervous about this. There is some talk, of course, about asymmetric attacks, sleeper cell attacks in the United States as well, if the regime in Iran has decided that it's going to fight to the bitter end. If it does, my sense is that it will not bode well for the regime. I don't think they'll come out stronger as a result. Seems like suicide to me, but I think these are the sorts of choices that right now are in front of the supreme leader, who has had a very bad night.
So, Jonathan, when you say surrender, do you mean surrender the promulgation of a nuclear program? Do you mean surrender with regard to, striking targets inside Israel? Or does surrender mean the Ayatollah is no longer in charge? What does surrender mean? Or all of the above?
I think that's the big question. In other words, what is the regime willing to do? I think we could maybe start by saying that surrender means we give up our nuclear program, but that's kind of moot now, right? It's all been destroyed. There's nothing to give up. I mean, you could say I won't try to rebuild it, but it would take decades, I think. All the scientists are gone. The leadership of the program's gone. The facilities appear to be, destroyed. So there's not much there. I think the question then becomes the missiles that they've been firing at Israel, and the missiles that they've been firing at ships in the Red Sea, the harassing of maritime traffic. Those are questions. And I think also just the continued funding of the proxies. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq and Syria. Are the Iranians going to continue to fund those actors right now, or are they going to wave the white flag? But I will tell you that there is an open question here. about, can you still be the Islamic Republic of Iran? Can you still be pursuing a revolution in the Middle East? Right? They call themselves a revolutionary regime. Can you do all of that while surrendering to your two biggest enemies, your most bitter foes, the United States and Israel? They have just delivered a beating to the Iranian regime. Does the Iranian regime even acknowledge that right now, knowing that if they do so, it may mean the end of what they are sort of in their essence?
Mhm.
And I think that's the big question we have to ask ourselves. It does look like the regime is unraveling. For me, it does not look like there's much of a future here, but they may
Wow.
try to hang on. If they do, I think they'll sort of look like the North Korean version, of a country in the Middle East.
Wow. So we were talking about the now what phase of that question with regard to the nuclear program. Let's talk about the phase of the question, now what, for U.S. involvement here. Because a lot of critics of this action tonight say it's going to spark a wider conflagration, escalate tensions, World War III. What do you respond to those critics who say that the United States, no matter President Trump saying this was a one and done unless Iran retaliates, that we're involved now, this is ours?
Well, we are involved, but I think for those that are warning that this is back to the future, that we're back to 2001 or 2002 Bush administration policies, I got to say I think that's a bit exaggerated, because I don't see us putting boots on the ground. I don't see us engaging in state building. I don't see those things where we're spending blood and treasure in the ways that I think the Bush administration pursued in those early years of the so-called war on terror. Now, it is possible that the United States gets struck with asymmetric attacks, sleeper cells in the United States, attacks against our allies that could potentially send oil spiking. We could see, asymmetric attacks against American servicemen in Europe or beyond. Certainly, I would expect the regime, if it's still intact, to try to be killing Israelis or Jews wherever they can find them worldwide, including in the United States. So I think those are all risks. But I think the question that I ask.
All right, I do think we lost Jonathan Shanzer's audio there. We do apologize. We're back there live at the White House. That happens sometimes with some of our.
The Israelis destroyed 75% of the targets so far, and the United States has come in and hit 25%.
All right, Jonathan Shanzer, we lost you for a minute there. We still have you. We're going to take you for a couple more minutes here. So we know that there's going to be this press briefing at the Pentagon at 8 a.m. Eastern time. What are you looking to hear from Secretary Hegseth, from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? What can that battle damage assessment look like this early on? What would you ask them if you were sitting there in the briefing?
Well, my understanding is that usually these things take about 24 hours. And so it's going to be early, right? We're going to be looking at an assessment that's going to be coming in, somewhere around 12 hours in. So it's probably going to be an interim assessment with follow-ups. I think that at the end of the day, what we're looking for is just, do we have high confidence that these nuclear facilities have been destroyed from within, that these massive ordnance penetrators, these MOPS, that they dug in, right? These weapons, they actually, they literally screw down into the earth. And then you have a secondary fuse that detonates. And so then you've got, as I understand it, a 5,000-pound bomb that detonates once it has dug into the earth. Did the whole thing implode? That's what it's probably an easier question to answer. But again, I'm going to be waiting for Pete Hegseth and for his generals to give us the assessment of what happened. It'll be an interim assessment, and then there'll probably be a follow-up maybe 12 hours later, where hopefully we'll get the full picture. I will say, by the way, that the Iranians, maybe somewhat predictably, have already come out and said, it was not damaged as much as the United States was saying, that, Donald Trump's speech was hyperbole. which of course is possible, but it's also quite possible that the regime is lying through its teeth, because that is what the Iranian regime has been known to do now for going on 5 decades.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how will we trust them with their statements, with what they tell us about the shape of the nuclear program? Trust but verify the messages coming out of the regime. Will anyone take them credibly to that point?
No, they won't. And I think, it reminds me a lot, for those who can remember the Iraq War, the second Iraq War. They had a guy they called Baghdad Bob, who was the spokesperson for Saddam Hussein's regime. And as the regime was crumbling, he was out there saying that, this is the mighty Iraqi army and that no one's defeating them, and the United States is a paper tiger. This strikes me as quite similar. But again, I want to see those battle damage assessments. I want to see what they see, or at least whatever the unclassified version of that is, because I've learned from wars past, you gotta let the experts weigh in. You don't jump to conclusions. You wait. I want to hear, by the way, what the FBI is talking about the threats to the homeland. I want to hear what the Israelis are saying about threats around the region. These things we're going to have to learn, I think, slowly over the next, let's say, half day, maybe even to the next week, about what the threats are and whether there's additional work that needs to be done.
All right, Jonathan Schanzer there. I can't thank you enough. I know you're extremely busy tonight tracking all of this down. You're a great resource online and social media as well. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, we are fastly approaching the top of a new hour. Almost 9 o'clock here on the West Coast, almost midnight there on the East Coast in Washington. So we do have more news to get to. Reading from the Associated Press right now here, they report this, that the United States is stepping up evacuation flights for American citizens from Israel to Europe and continuing to draw down its staff at diplomatic missions in Iraq amid fears of Iranian retaliation as U.S. interests in the Middle East grow. So we do have these live pictures there in and over Jerusalem. You can see there the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, the Gold Dome there. Also, yet another vantage point in Jerusalem. So the Associated Press has it as follows, that even before those airstrikes were announced by the president on Saturday night in Washington, that the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem announced the start of evacuation flights for American civilians from Israel. So it's almost 7 in the morning there on a very early Sunday morning. 67 American citizens left Israel on 2 government flights bound for Athens on Saturday, and 4 more evacuation flights to Athens were planned for Sunday. That's according to an internal State Department document seen by the Associated Press. In addition to the flights, a cruise ship carrying more than 1,000 American citizens, including several hundred Jewish youngsters who'd been visiting Israel on an organized tour that's known as the Birthright Program, they arrived in Cyprus, according to that very same document. So we have live pictures there. To Jonathan Schanzer's point and Michael Makovsky's point, it does look like Israel has, for the time being, paused some of their own kinetic strikes on targets inside Iran, at least for now. So, like I said, when we do approach the top of the hour in about a minute and a half here, we're going to be replaying for you the statement from President Trump. He was flanked by his vice president, by his secretary of state, and by his secretary of defense. And then, of course, we're going to be diving into even more expert analysis and commentary. Remember, we're relying so heavily on the Foundation for Defensive Democracies. More analysts on the deck for that. And then we're going to be getting congressional response, a lot of varied responses, some lauding and really touting this move by the president, others saying it was blatantly unconstitutional. Also, some saying that President Trump should be impeached for it. We'll break down all of those reactions. Some Democrats, especially like Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the House, saying that the president needed congressional authorization to do what he did tonight. Of course, he didn't get it. And we'll be breaking down some of those key questions on Capitol Hill in just a moment here. So I want to thank all of you for being with us. It's been a very, very busy night. We're catching our breath here as we go into yet a new hour. And we're at that hour here, 9 o'clock on the West Coast, midnight there on the East Coast. I'm Andrew Kraft. This was the message from President Trump tonight, announcing the United States, for the very first time, struck targets inside Iran at 3 nuclear facilities. Let's watch.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, that was the message there from the president at the White House now about 2 hours ago. And the White House also put out some of these photos. If you haven't seen them yet, remember, they're in the Situation Room. CBS News is reporting that among those in the Situation Room monitoring the mission were, of course, the president and the vice president, but also Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. You see there the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe. Also, remember, Marco Rubio also is serving right now as the National Security Advisor. You see there in the yellow, White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. Also the Deputy Chief of Staff, Dan Scavino. The other Deputy Chief of Staff, James Blair. And Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was there, as well as Andy Baker from the National Security Council, and the White House Counsel, David Warrington, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. So reported there by CBS News. Who was in there at the time these strikes were launched? Now, in the meantime, speaking of, let's keep it here stateside. Remember, we were bringing you some of these messages coming from major cities around the country about what they are doing to ramp up security in their respective locales in New York, D.C., also in California there. Live picture over the New York City skyline. Remember, we were hearing from the NYPD today this. And I think we have it there, the NYPD. So they're saying this. We're tracking the situation unfolding in Iran, that out of an abundance of caution, we're deploying additional resources to religious, cultural, and diplomatic sites across New York City and coordinating with our federal partners, saying we'll continue to monitor for any potential impact to New York City. Now, that's the NYPD. Live picture there. Let's go across the country to Los Angeles. A live picture there at LAX. We're hearing from California Governor Gavin Newsom. This, he's saying, following the president's action in Iran, California's State Threat Assessment Center is actively monitoring for any potential impacts there in California. And so you can see there, he goes on to say, while there are no specific or credible counter threats we are aware of at this time, he goes on to say, we urge everyone to stay vigilant and report anything that they may see. Also, we're hearing from Washington, D.C., the police department there putting out this statement saying the Metropolitan Police Department is closely monitoring the events in Iran. We're actively coordinating with our local, state, and federal law enforcement partners to share information and monitor intelligence in order to help safeguard residents, businesses, and visitors in the District of Columbia, saying at this time there are no known threats to the district. However, MPD has maintained an increased presence at religious institutions across the city. They say we continue to urge the public to remain vigilant and help keep our community safe. They say if you see something, say something. So in the meantime there, that is from the D.C. Police Department coming in. So like I said, many of these metropolitan cities nationwide, they are on high alert, sending more security personnel and details to some of these cultural and religious sites in their cities, just as safekeeping, to be extra cautious as well. Now, in the meantime, though, wanted to focus our efforts right now on Capitol Hill to bring you so much of the reaction here. We want to put this up. This is a live picture there on Capitol Hill. And remember, I read out to you the statement from Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, the Democrat from New York in the House. He said this, that Donald Trump promised to bring peace to the Middle East, saying he has failed to deliver on that promise, saying the risk of war has now dramatically increased, and I pray for the safety of our troops in the region who have been put in harm's way. He says President Trump misled the country about his intentions, saying failed to seek congressional authorization for the use of military force and risks American entanglement in a potentially disastrous war in the Middle East. He says, first, the Trump administration bears the heavy burden of explaining to the American people why this military action was undertaken. Second, Congress must be fully and immediately briefed in a classified setting. Third, Donald Trump shoulders complete and total responsibility for any adverse consequences that flow from this unilateral military action there. So, strong words from Hakeem Jeffries. Now, remember, a senior White House official told Fox that the White House gave a courtesy heads up to congressional leadership. Though Politico is reporting that the full Gang of Eight was not briefed before the strike. Now, remember, the Gang of Eight are congressional leaders, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, the House Speaker, and the House Minority Leader, and the chair and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Nicholas Wu at Politico says Democrats were not briefed before the strike, according to a person familiar with the situation telling that to Nicholas Wu of Politico, though some were notified shortly before Trump's Truth Social post. Also, we're hearing from the House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mike Rogers of Alabama. He says, quote, it would be a grave mistake to retaliate against our forces. We're also hearing from more Democrats, like former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, also current Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. This is their tack, their taking, their response to some of these here. Want to put Schumer up for you. Andrew Desiderio posting it there from Punchbowl. Schumer says this: President Trump must provide the American people and Congress clear answers on the actions taken tonight and their implications for the safety of Americans. No president should be allowed to unilaterally march this nation into something as consequential as war with erratic threats and no strategy. He says confronting Iran's ruthless campaign of terror, nuclear ambitions, and regional aggression demands strength, resolve, and strategic clarity. The danger of wider, longer, and more devastating war has now dramatically increased. He says we must enforce the War Powers Act, and I'm urging Leader Thune to put it on the Senate floor immediately. I'm voting for it and implore all senators on both sides of the aisle to vote for it. So it looks like there's some type of effort afoot there, at least among Democratic senators led by Schumer, to somewhat retroactively vote on a War Powers resolution in the Senate to kind of retroactively authorize this. You see there, former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi saying tonight the president ignored the Constitution by unilaterally engaging our military without congressional authorization. She says, I join my colleagues in demanding answers from the administration on this operation, which she says endangers American lives and risks further escalation. I believe we also have a message coming from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democrat from New York. She says this: the president's disastrous decision to bomb Iran without authorization is a grave violation of the Constitution and congressional war powers. He has impulsively risked launching a war that may ensnare us for generations. She says it is absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment. So AOC going so far saying this is grounds for impeachment. So this is what we do here on Live Now. We give you all of the reaction from both sides of the aisle. We pull no punches here, neither fear nor favor. We show you what Democrats are saying. We also show you what Republicans are saying. Let's put up some Republicans here. Okay, so we'll get to some of the Republican reaction in just a moment here. We do have more analysis, more context coming in, including from our friend there at the FDD, Joe Trusman. He joins me. Joe, thanks for hopping on. I know it's extremely late where you are, but this is a momentous, historic occasion, and we got to get to it. Your initial reaction, you and I were talking earlier this week about the kind of what ifs, the hypotheticals, if this were to take place. It has now taken place here. What are you hearing?
Right. Historic moment for sure. Nevertheless, it happened a little sooner than I thought it would, but it happened. But now, more than anything, my concern is Iran's reaction and how it will respond. But of course, not only how Iran will respond, and I think we talked about this last time you and I spoke, but their proxies, their network of clients in the region, they've been mostly quiet since the Israel-Iran conflict started about 8-9 days ago now. So we need to see, or we need to observe, or I'm trying to find out at least. I'm curious to know what's going to happen on that front, right? Because you have Iraqi militia groups, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, of course, and there are other groups. So there's a few of them in the region. Some battered more than others, we know that, but still potent. And it caused a lot of problems, not only for Israel, of course, but U.S. bases in the region, and of course, American allies in the region too. So now we're just in a wait and see mode, see what happens.
Yeah, and I think anyone saying they know it's going to happen does not know what's going to happen here. But as far as U.S. involvement is concerned, is that it, do you think, or will there be more?
I think a lot depends on Iran's response. That's what I think hinges. We, at least from reports over the last, let's say, 48 hours or so, I've observed a lot of messaging or reports actually that just say that show that the United States is moving a lot of assets into the region. All right, the amount of military assets that were moved by the United States into the region is not needed for the bombing that occurred tonight. I think what's happening there is the United States is prepared for a response. All right, they want to have the assets in place. in case they have to go back into Iran or perhaps into other countries, maybe Iraq, for example, if Iraqi militias begin to attack U.S. bases. So they want to have those assets there just in case. Hopefully, they don't have to use them, of course, right? But you know, these militias, these groups, Iran and others, they have said they're going to respond if the U.S. intervened in the war, and the U.S. did. So now it's their turn.
Yeah, you know, the kind of fundamental thinking after Israel took out Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, in Tehran last summer, and kind of the blunt force reaction, Iran retaliated against Israel 2 times last year. Many had characterized Iran as a paper tiger, that it's all bark, no bite. And you even heard that over the last week as kind of the number of missiles they've launched into Israel has dwindled here. So is it safe to say that they won't retaliate based on the threats President Trump is giving and offering, the saber rattling from the White House, that any retaliation by Iran will be met with this amount of force, if not stronger force than what we just used? So is Iran in this now weakened posture, weakened state? Should they crawl into a hole?
I think they are in a weakened state, for sure. I think the Israelis did a lot of damage over the last 8-9 days against their military infrastructure, of course, their nuclear sites. But I don't think we have seen the worst out of the Iranians, all right? This includes their proxies and clients. So I think the biggest problem, at least for the Israelis, for example, is the missile interceptors they've been using. They've had to use up over the last 8-9 days now. Let's say Iran decides, with their remaining missile launchers, they decide to begin launching barrages against Israel that lasts days and days and days. The Israelis will eventually lose interceptors, will run out of interceptors. And that's a big problem. What if the proxies join in? Then there's more missiles coming. How does Israel defend their skies without interceptors? So there could be a lot of damage that could be caused here if this war drags on. Of course, you have the problem with the United States, too. They have military bases. They have allies in the region. They can be attacked, too. So I understand the paper tiger. Some people calling it Iran a paper tiger, but I'm more conservative. I think there's a lot more that they can do. Okay. They have tricks up their sleeves, essentially. And they're also known for acts of terrorism, too. They don't have to retaliate only via missiles or only via drones. They have supported proxies that have carried out acts of terrorism against soft targets, against embassies, against Jewish targets, Israeli targets, American targets, obviously. So that's another big concern of mine, is terrorism.
No, mine too. And I was going to ask you that. And I don't want to be alarmist by any means. I don't want to be hyperbolic here. But I think, I speak for a lot of viewers right now. This is, a scary moment in world history, American history. We just don't know. It's very uncertain. But if someone has in the back of their mind right now, if they're watching, the thought that, Iran will do something on U.S. soil in the homeland, are they right to think that? Are they right to be concerned about that?
I think they have a right to be concerned, because the problem is Iran has demonstrated that they're willing to do this, all right, or its proxies have the capability to do this. That's the problem here in the homeland, here in the United States, and that does concern me. Can I give you a percentage if that's going to happen? I can't, but Iran has many tools at its disposal. That's the issue here. Yeah. So that's one of the things, one of the possibilities that can happen. I'm not saying just here in the homeland, of course. There could be acts of terrorism in other countries as well, where they're American targets, or whether it's Israeli or Jewish targets. So again, that's a concern of mine. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. Listen, the Iranians and the Iranian government and their proxies have been known to play the long game. So they've waited months to carry out attacks or retaliations when it comes to employing acts of terrorism, like bombings, for example. Right. So there's so much to consider here. It's very difficult, but at least I think people should know that this doesn't mean Iran can attack in different ways. It doesn't have to be just missiles and drones, what we usually see, the conventional means, what we usually see on television.
All right, Joe Truzen, we're going to leave it at that. I know it's so late, and we thank you so much for coming on and helping us make sense of what is an extremely complex conflict that is still fluid, still playing out. Joe, good to see you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, in the meantime here, so we're not going to do any commercial breaks this hour. We're going to get back, though, to Capitol Hill. I was kind of highlighting for you some of the reaction coming in from lawmakers. We were going through kind of a litany of Democratic messages. Let's focus our efforts now, though, coming from Republicans here, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican of Georgia. I want to put this up here. She says this: that every time America is on the verge of greatness, we get involved in another foreign war, she says. There would not be bombs falling on the people of Israel if Netanyahu had not dropped bombs on the people of Iran first, she says. Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. This is not our fight. Peace is the answer. She also says, let us join together and pray for the safety of our U.S. troops and Americans in the Middle East. She says, let us pray that we are not attacked by terrorists on our homeland after our border was open for the past 4 years and over 2 million gotaways came in. She says, let us pray for peace. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, somewhat of a kind of now vociferous critic of this action, alongside some of her Republican colleagues in the House like Thomas Massie, who called this unconstitutional on X, who also signed on to an effort on the House side to also authorize these strikes via congressional authorization, of vote on the House floor. We'll see if that effort gains any traction. Majority Leader John Thune in the Senate says this: the regime in Iran, which has committed itself to bringing death to America and wiping Israel off the map, has rejected all diplomatic pathways to peace. The mullah's misguided pursuit of nuclear weapons must be stopped. As we take action tonight to ensure a nuclear weapon remains out of reach for Iran, I stand with President Trump and pray for the American troops and personnel in harm's way. You see him there. All right, we also have House Speaker Mike Johnson. He says this, and this is a long statement, bear with me, that the military operations in Iran should serve as a clear reminder to our adversaries and allies that President Trump means what he says. He says the president gave Iran's leader every opportunity to make a deal, but Iran refused to commit to a nuclear disarmament agreement. President Trump has been consistent and clear that a nuclear-armed Iran will not be tolerated. That posture has now been enforced with strength, precision, and clarity. He says the president's decisive action prevents the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, which chants death to America, from obtaining the most lethal weapon on the planet. This is America First policy in action. He says, God bless our brave men and women in uniform, the most lethal fighting force on the planet, as we pray for their safe return home. May God bless America. Johnson goes on to say this, that the president made the right call and did what he needed to do. Leaders in Congress were aware of the urgency of this situation, and the commander-in-chief evaluated that the imminent danger outweighed the time it would take for Congress to act. The world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, which chants death to America, simply could not be allowed the opportunity to obtain and use nuclear weapons. The president fully respects the Article I power of Congress, and tonight's necessary, limited, and targeted strike follows the history and tradition of similar military actions under presidents of both parties. So you see there, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, let's go back to Capitol Hill. He's kind of trying to get ahead of this question on whether or not Congress should have authorized this strike via a vote in the House and the Senate first. And you see him there doing it in that statement, saying this: the president fully respects Article I power of Congress, saying tonight's necessary, limited, and targeted strike follows the history and tradition of similar military actions under presidents of both parties. So in the next couple of days, you're going to hear this a lot on Capitol Hill, especially from Democrats who want a vote on the authorization of these strikes now, retroactively to take place. You're also going to hear it from some Republicans, like the likes of Tom Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others. All right, more Republican reaction as well. Take a look at this. Senator Roger Wicker there, Republican of Mississippi. He's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He says this: our commander-in-chief has made a deliberate and correct decision to eliminate the existential threat posed by the Iranian regime. We now have very serious choices ahead to provide security for our citizens and our allies and stability for the Middle East. He says, well done to our military personnel. You're the best. All right, so Andrew Kraft back here. Thank you so much for being with us as we approach the bottom of the hour. We're, like I said, going all night with our coverage here of this historic moment, uncertain moment, as the United States, for the very first time, has struck targets inside the country of Iran. You know, the U.S. has a very long and complicated relationship with the Islamic Republic of Iran, especially at the outset in 1979 when the Ayatollah took over after the fall and deposition of the Shah of Iran. We played you some of the sound from the former crown prince of Iran, the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi. He's been all over social media and on cable just last week, saying this is a new moment for Iran. Iran needs a new leader, saying if push comes to shove, if he were to be that leader, he would step into some type of transitional role. So a lot of history is really coming to the fore over the last almost 50 years of U.S.-Iranian relations. And of course, you know what happened in 1979, the taking of 52 American hostages who worked at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They were held for more than 400 days. They were released January the 20th, 1981, upon the inauguration of President Ronald Reagan. So history is imbued in this entire conflict tonight. And so I had to mention it as well, including our relationship with Israel. President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu spoke on the phone just today. I'm not entirely sure if it was before or after the strikes took place, but we have live pictures in Jerusalem. Take a look at these here. We also have a message in from the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, thanking President Trump.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
All right, that was the message there from the Israeli Prime Minister. Also, we have a message from the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog. Take a look at this. Herzog says this, that in the pages of human history, that this is a moment when the principles of liberty, responsibility, and security have triumphed. A decisive moment between the axis of terror and evil and the axis of hope. He says, thank you, POTUS, real Donald Trump. Thank you, United States of America. So the President of Israel there, Isaac Herzog. So you know that Israel is a parliamentary system with both a prime minister and a president there, and Herzog and Netanyahu with a message of thanks to the president and to the United States here. In the meantime, remember, we've been relying so heavily on our colleagues at Fox, including reporter and correspondent Jennifer Griffin, reporter and correspondent as well, Trey Yingst, filing this report at the very outset of the strikes. Let's watch.
Yeah, Brett, good evening. This has been the talk of Israel for the past several days as the country waited to see if the Americans would get directly involved in the conflict. And even up in the last few hours, I was talking with current and former sources, trying to get an understanding of when this might happen. And at 1:55 local time, one source said, rumors, Trump gave the word, supposed to be happening now. We were working on tracking it down, and the president taking to Truth Social to say the Americans did indeed strike 3 separate Iranian nuclear facilities, including the Fordow nuclear facility deep underground outside of the Iranian capital of Tehran. The bottom line here is that people are talking about enrichment. They understand that this decision was made because the Iranians were increasing their uranium enrichment capabilities and increasing the purity closer and closer to weapons-grade material. And the concern was that the Iranian regime was just weeks away from being able to build a nuclear bomb. We've seen over the past 9 days, the country has the ability to strike major population centers here in Israel with ballistic missiles. So you can imagine that having a nuclear warhead that could ultimately be attached to a ballistic missile would clearly be a direct threat to the Jewish state. And that was why the Israelis said that they made the decision to start these strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities and against top IRGC officials. And clearly tonight, President Trump ordering these strikes against the Iranian regime's nuclear program because there was no off-ramp for diplomacy at this point. And so this is a historic moment in the Middle East tonight, and again, an opportunity for the region, as the president laid out in his statement, for peace in the future, because this is a region that understands peace through strength.
Okay, so the report there by Trey Yings on with special report anchor Brett Baer. So in the meantime, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I think it's safe to take a quick commercial break. Let's catch our breath here. A lot of reporting, though, to get to. We'll get it to you when we come back. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us here. So we've got a lot more reporting to get to as we continue to monitor this extremely historic night in not only U.S. history, but in the history of the Middle East here. We have a live picture there over the skies of Tel Aviv. It's about 7:30 on a very early Sunday morning. We're going to leave that up. I want to just read out to you from the Associated Press, because we're hearing from Iranian officials, I believe the highest ranking Iranian official we've heard from since this all happened. The Iranian foreign minister, his name is Abbas Araghchi, says on X that Tehran, quote, reserves all options to retaliate. Now, remember, I just said this. He's the first ranking official in the kind of Iranian governance structure to comment on the strikes on Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz. He wrote this: "The events this morning are outrageous and will have everlasting consequences." Oh, we have the tweet here. Here we go. So this is Abbas Araghchi, who, remember, we showed you speaking in Geneva just yesterday after he met with his counterparts from the EU, Britain, France, and Germany. Remember, those talks in Geneva yielded no progress, no breakthroughs on diplomacy, and you know how the rest of the story goes. But he said this: the United States, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, has committed a grave violation of the UN Charter, international law, and the NPT by attacking Iran's peaceful nuclear installations. He says the events this morning are outrageous and will have everlasting consequences there. So had to get that in as well. Now, the NPT, if you don't know, that's the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons that the United States, I believe, is a party to. So Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, calling out the United States. That's Iran's top diplomat, warning that U.S. attacks will, quote, have everlasting consequences, and Tehran reserves all options to retaliate. Now, the Associated Press is reporting this, that a semi-official news agency in Iran has published an account attack on Fordo, quoting one of its reporters. Now, this news agency in Iran is known as Fars. It is believed to be close to Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard, so take it with a grain of salt. Said its reporter heard anti-aircraft fire around 2:05 a.m. local time. The reporter heard explosions 2 minutes later. At around 2:35 in the morning, I arrived near the Matab recreational complex. At that moment, amid the air defense activity, flames suddenly erupted from the direction of Fordo. Simultaneously with the flames, a faint trail of smoke and a significant amount of dust rose in the area, Fars quoted the reporter as saying. It offered no photos or video showing the attack. So, just recounting what the Associated Press is reporting, kind of echoing this account from a semi-official news agency within Iran. And that news agency's reporter recounted what he saw, what he heard, very early in the morning. So let's go back out live to our shots there in and around Israel. There, live in Tel Aviv, you notice the camera just panned up to focus more on the sky. I'll tell you why. Because Israel's military says it has identified missiles launched from Iran toward the territory of Israel. The public has been instructed to go to shelters in protected areas and remain there until further notice. So that's a live picture there over Tel Aviv. This is a live picture over Jerusalem. If we could put up that post on Israeli flights in and out of the country. From what we understand, from what is being reported, the airspace over Israel essentially is now closed and has been for some time. I want to put this up here. Take a look at this. Aisha Hosni, our friend and colleague there, she covers Capitol Hill for Fox. She says this in her reporting: Israel has closed airspace to incoming and outgoing flights. Okay, so want to take this shot yet again. You see the camera posing and positioning up into the sky. It's about 7:40 in the morning, very early Sunday morning there in Israel. We're only showing you this because Israel's military says it has identified missiles launched from Iran toward the territory of Israel. And the public has been instructed to go to shelters in protected areas and remain there until further notice. Now, usually I'm on the desk when this shot that we have is not daylight. It's nighttime, and you can better see how some of the missile defense systems, like the Iron Dome, intercept these Iranian barrages. So in the daytime, it'll be a little harder to see that. And I'm not guaranteeing that we're going to see that right now. That is just what's being reported. Also, our colleague Trey Yingst confirming this, saying that there are incoming missile alerts. Now, one of the questions I had asked some of our experts was, will Iran take this out only on Israel. Meaning President Trump has threatened even more greater force against Iran if they retaliate. So what does Iran do? Does Iran just give it to Israel in lieu of attacking U.S. interests and assets? That's a question I have for experts that I think we're going to have to be asking ourselves throughout the course of the next day. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, saying sirens are sounding across Israel due to another Iranian missile launch. Let's see if we can hear that on this shot that we have in Tel Aviv. Okay, so you can't hear that. What you can hear are the chirping of birds on a Sunday morning. So tranquil, peaceful, yet so many Israelis are under threat, high alert due to this constant barrage of Iranian ballistic missiles and drones that they have been volleying and levying against each other for the better part of more than a week now. Some of our experts have said, would there be a pause from Israel striking Iran after what the United States did tonight? And it seems like that is the case. Because we're not getting any reports of Israel striking targets inside Iran. What we're getting right now is sirens sounding across Israel due to Iran launching missiles at Israel. So we also have a live picture in Jerusalem. You know, Israel is not a large country by any means. About 10 million people. It's a small blip in the Middle East. And it is very far from Iran and vice versa. Let's listen to if we can see or hear anything in this shot over Jerusalem. No audio on that, unfortunately. I'm trying to see if we can hear any of the sirens sounding. Let's just keep this up, though, over Tel Aviv. That is why, presumably, the camera is looking up at the sky to see whether or not it can catch any of the missile defense systems Israel has to intercept some of these. Okay, you can kind of see, look at that. You can kind of see the trail there of the Iron Dome. I know it's very difficult to see because of the cloud cover, but smack dab in the middle of your screen, you can see the trail of the Iron Dome missile interceptors there. I believe that's what I'm watching. Having seen this many, many times, let's see yet again if we can hear anything on this. Okay, so you heard there are multiple loud explosions over the skies of Tel Aviv right now. You know, the Iron Dome and other missile defense systems that Israel uses. Okay, you can hear the sirens now. This is another shot that we have. And you can see kind of the missile interceptor residue in the air. Take a look at that. You hear the sirens. I'm going to stop talking. Let's keep listening. All right, so you heard those sirens there sounding all across Tel Aviv. We have yet another vantage point in the sky over Tel Aviv as well. So this is what we got about, 5 minutes ago? Israel's military saying it has identified missiles launched from Iran toward Israel. and that the public has been instructed to go to shelters and protected areas and remain there until further notice. It is about 7:45 there on a very early Sunday morning. Israelis are used to this. They're not used to the frequency of it, but they are used to it. And remember, these Israeli air defense systems and missile interceptors, they're extremely accurate, but they're not perfect. And we've seen some of the devastation that some of these Iranian strikes have caused to civilian sites, military sites, you name it, runs the gamut. And scores of Israelis have been killed in these. Let's keep listening here. All right, we have a better kind of grade there, so you can maybe make out some of the interceptions of the Iranian drones and missiles here. Let's keep listening. All right, Andrew Kraft back here. If you're just coming on and you're wondering why we're looking at the sky over Tel Aviv in Israel, it's because Iran is launching a missile and drone barrage right now. You heard the sirens sounding. We have yet another vantage point. Our camera is going to pan down over Tel Aviv. Let's take that. Now, I'm not entirely sure if what we're just looking at is cloud cover or some of the smoke that's coming up from the missile interceptors, like many systems that Israel uses. It's not just the Iron Dome system. It's also the Arrow system. It's also the David Sling is another major missile defense system that is deployed by Israel. Also, the United States is stepping up evacuation flights for American citizens from Israel to Europe and is continuing to draw down its staff at diplomatic missions in Iraq as fears of Iranian retaliation against U.S. interests in the Middle East grow. So even before those airstrikes were announced by President Trump tonight, the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem announced the start of evacuation flights for American civilians from Israel. 67 American citizens left Israel on 2 government flights bound for Athens on Saturday, and 4 more evacuation flights to Athens were planned for Sunday. That's according to an internal State Department document seen by the Associated Press. Now, in addition to the flights, a cruise ship carrying more than 1,000 American citizens, including several hundred Jewish young people who had been visiting Israel on an organized tour known as Birthright, they arrived in Cyprus, according to that very same document. So in the meantime, you're taking a LiveNOW look there over Tel Aviv on a very early Sunday morning. Now, we had a shot there over Jerusalem. We didn't have any audio in this shot over Jerusalem, and so we're not entirely sure if those sirens are sounding in Jerusalem as well. But that was the message from Israeli officials, especially and including the IDF, saying that a short while ago, the IDF identified missiles launched from Iran toward the territory of the State of Israel, and that defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat, saying that upon receiving an alert, the public is instructed to enter a protected space and remain there until further notice. So let's go back to Tel Aviv there. Let's keep listening. We also have another live vantage point. Let's take this. Okay, you can better see there some of the residue of some of the missile interceptors there. Let's listen to this shot. Okay, just wanted to come on camera here and put our two vantage points over the skies of Tel Aviv up as we are learning that, according to the IDF, Iran is launching some type of missile or drone barrage at sites across Israeli territory. And take a look at this. You see there in the upper right hand of your screen, that was Jerusalem. That was not Tel Aviv. And then, of course, below that is Tel Aviv here. So I was mistaken there. We were only looking at the blue sky, so I was not entirely sure whether or not this shot was Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. Of course, you know it's Jerusalem. You see there the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, the Al-Aqsa Mosque there in the distance. And you saw some of the strains in the early morning blue Sunday sky as so many Israelis waking up to the sound of alarms and sirens of yet more threats to them in the air. Let's keep listening. So we have this shot there over Jerusalem. We still have this shot there over Tel Aviv in Israel. Let's listen to this. So in the meantime, we're going to keep monitoring some of these vantage points live over the skies of Israel. So as you would imagine, this has been of a piece over the last more than 7 days going on. Iran to Israel, Israel to Iran, the tit for tat, trading blows, trading barbs, trading targets and explosions with drones, missiles. We don't know when that's going to end. We thought, and just for the record, right now, Iran is attacking Israel with some of these. Israel is not attacking Iran at the moment. That could change in retaliation. You never know. But the question on so many of our minds is this. What is the Iranian retaliation going to be against the United States for what President Trump authorized tonight, striking these nuclear facilities, 3 of them in Iran? Take a look at them. We have them. The Isfahan facility, the Natanz facility, and the Fordow facility. That's the question. There are U.S. assets, troops, citizens in the region, and many are wondering what the response is going to be. All right, I'm Andrew Kraft. That's going to do it for my coverage here on Live Now from Fox. We also have some new video, according to our colleague Trey Yingst. I want to put this up. This is a video as well of what he is experiencing right now in Israel as we speak. He just filed this report on social media. It's brief. Let's watch.
Iranians have just launched a large-scale ballistic missile attack against Israel following those American strikes overnight that targeted Iran's nuclear facilities. We've heard massive explosions amid interceptions overhead. Initially, we were reporting outside. We've taken some cover here as this attack continues. So far, it's been in 2 waves targeting Tel Aviv. 2 sets of sirens sounded, and some really, really large interceptions that are shaking the entire building that we are in. There are no reports yet of impacts, but it's very early. We have to wait and see what extra information that we can gather. But again, the latest information that I have right now, Iran has launched another large ballistic missile attack against Israel. Sirens are sounding across this country from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. There are currently millions of people in bomb shelters taking cover as this fire continues from Iran. There are also reports of sirens sounding in neighboring Jordan as these missiles fly overhead. We'll keep you posted as we get more information.
And as will we. We'll keep you posted when we get more information. Trey Yingst, of course, an incredible reporter, incredible resource down on the ground there in Israel with that update. We've been showing you these scenes out of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as this yet another iteration of the attack by Iran is taking place right now, live as we speak. Like I said, though, that's going to do it for my lifetime up here on the Live Now desk. It's been a privilege and a pleasure bringing you history in the making as it unfolds in real time, live, raw, and uninterrupted here on Live Now from Fox. We're not going anywhere. We're not done tonight. My colleague there in Orlando, digital journalist Gine Francine, she has you covered. She takes it from here after this quick commercial break. Have a good night.